In the previous episode, we went over the Packers schematics on offense and defense, and we mentioned how good this Packers offense has been. So let's start with the man in the middle, and that is quarterback Jordan Love. Now, we do need to mention the fact that he left week 18 early due to an elbow injury. Is he going to be 100%? We'll never know that answer, but that is something to pay attention to. Now, when we look at Jordan Love overall this season, he's 19th in passing yards per game out of 46 qualifying quarterbacks with a minimum of 100 dropbacks, but he's tied for fourth in yards per attempt with the one and only Jalen Hurts. He has a completion percentage of 63.1, which was 33rd in the NFL, an adjusted completion percentage of 74.7, which is 24th in the NFL. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the Packers receivers drop passes at the ninth highest rate in the NFL. He has 25 touchdowns and is sixth in touchdown rate, but he also has 11 interceptions. His turnover-worthy play percentage significantly dropped late in the season. He had 13 in weeks 1 through 12. Don't forget he missed weeks 2 and 3 as well, but he had 0 in weeks 13 through 17. In those time span, we saw his average depth of throw drop from 9.7 to 8.3 yards. He has elite arm talent. He can make all the throws, whether he's on platform or throwing on the run. He is mobile and he will extend plays and look to pass, but he's not really looking to scramble, as his 2.6% scramble rate ranks 37th out of 47 qualifying quarterbacks. He's dangerous and will get hot and can put up points in bunches, but he can also lose you games with the turnovers that he will throw on offense. So Eric, what did you see from Jordan Love, and what can we look forward to in this game?
If he has a clean pocket all day back there, he will absolutely pick you apart. I don't care what defense you have, but he's been really bad under pressure. It's something we highlighted before the first game, is that even though he's had some highlight throws off his back foot fading away, for the most part, it hasn't been to amazing success throughout his career. Now, here's the trick. You may think, okay, he stinks under pressure, blitz the heck out of him. Well, that's a terrible plan. He's absolutely destroyed the blitz, especially when he can see it coming. It's so obvious that he knows exactly which guy he's going to get it to against the blitz, and he's pinpoint accurate in those situations. Now, if you can generate pressure with 4, that's the key, because then he will throw it up for grabs and you can actually pick him off. One of the things relevant on the Eagles side is coming into the season, we talked about it, and you kind of pushed back against this narrative that Fangio was this soft, conservative, off coverage type defensive coordinator. Well, now the season's over. They were the best defense in the NFL against short, quick passes. So Love, he has a weird kind of average time to throw distribution curve, where if you look at the raw number, it says he's slow because, like you mentioned, he'll buy time and wait for guys to come open downfield. But it's more of like a bimodal curve where he'll have a fair share of quick passes, not that many in the middle, and then his fair share of long. And then it kind of averages out weird. A lot of like dump offs to the running backs and to the tight end, who we'll talk about, is highly athletic. So Love is a good player. Packers fans said he is not the same mobility after Jalen Carter gave him that little injury, and there's no signs that he's necessarily had full recovery since then. It's not something a guy you have to worry about having +1 in the run game or anything like that. But he's a real good quarterback, top 10 for sure. And the main thing, you talked about it earlier, is he'll stress the entire field. It doesn't matter if it's 50 yards down the field in the middle, or he has to throw a bullet across the field into the flat. He can do all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at the rest of the guys on this offense, we got to talk about Josh Jacobs, because he's a major focus of this offense, and it's really important because they have the second highest run rate in the NFL. He is 6th in total attempts and 6th in the NFL in rushing yards with 1,329, although he's 26th in yards per attempt among the 69 qualifying backs with a minimum of 50 carries this season. But he's extremely tough and a physical runner. He's 16th in broken tackles and missed tackles forced per attempt, and he doesn't take a lot of negative plays. He's 21st in stuff rate out of those 69 backs. So he is a major engine to the offense. But when we look at some of the other players on this offense, Christian Watson is now going to be out for this receiving core. So Eric, what do you think is going to happen with the receivers with Christian Watson not taking the field in this game?
So Dontavian Wicks was their target leader, which is kind of funny because he only ended up with 400 odd yards. He had the highest drop rate in the entire NFL. 1/5 of his passes he dropped, which is like a historically high rate. People remember him because he kind of went off at the end of last year, had a lot of fancy double move touchdowns and stuff like that. And he is a talented receiver, but he has hands of stone. But he can make you pay down the field. So it's someone you have to watch. Jaden Reed has been, outside of Watson, has been their best deep threat. He's a pretty enigmatic player because he will fill that Debo role where he'll take those jet sweeps, the screens, bubble screens, catch passes behind the line, even line up in the backfield at times. But he also, we remember it very keenly, he had that long touchdown against the Eagles. It's a guy you have to keep your eye on. Now, he really dropped off after a super hot start. It's unclear for me as to why, but he's definitely a solid receiver. Coming in the year, Luke Musgrave was their tight end 1. And Dick Kraft was this up-and-comer that they liked, athletic guy. Well, now he's completely become their star tight end. Musgrave has fallen out of favor completely. He can beat you down the field, and he's a good yak threat. So they'll target him in the red zone. He has the most touchdowns on their team. It's a guy that I specifically am noting as a key guy I would want to take away. If the Eagles give up a lot of points, I think Tucker Kraft will be a big reason why. So it is a really unique receiving core, and it's not like Fangio's beginning to call his Zeus coverage or anything where he's rolling a lot of coverage towards some star receiver. I highly doubt that will be the case here. And that's going to be a cool chess match to see play out. So did you have any other thoughts on some of their playmakers?
Yeah, it's just it's really hard to try and rotate the coverage to any one specific player because they are very similar in targets among all of them. The targets are very flat across the board, and then you look situationally in the red zone on third downs, it's very similar. So it's kind of hard to rotate coverage and take away any of those guys. Love does seem to like Romeo Doubs. I don't think he separates all that well. He's utilized on a lot of typical X receiver routes, slants, out routes, go routes, and he will make some concentration catches, some insane catches. But like I said, I don't think he creates a ton of separation. Dontavian Wicks, on the other hand, he can separate a little bit. He's likely to see the biggest increase in route run rate with Watson out. He only ran 48% of the routes run this season, but he did have the highest targets per route run rate on the team at 30.2%. That would be among the highest in the NFL. That will probably drop some as we see him run more routes in the NFL. But Tucker Kraft is a guy to watch out for. He's 4th in the team in targets, but he's efficient and a big play weapon. 3rd in yards per reception at the tight end position. 1st in yards after catch per reception. Has 7 touchdowns, which is tied for 4th. And that's something to really pay attention to is Kraft versus the Eagles safeties in the red zone. He's also first at the position and missed tackles force. He can stretch the seam and go above the rim and catch passes or catch underneath passes and run through guys. He is someone you must watch on tight end screens. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this receiving core. You mentioned it in the last episode, the schematic preview, that with Christian Watson out, that this team really struggles passing the ball for many different reasons. So make sure to check out that episode if you haven't seen it already. But let's switch over to the defensive skill players. When we look at some of the players on the back end of this defense, we got to start with their linebackers, Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper. Both linebackers are extremely fast and explosive players. Quay Walker was a first-round pick a couple of years ago. Edgerrin Cooper is a second-round pick. He is a rookie this season. Both of these guys fly to the ball. Walker is 15th in tackles per snap. Cooper is 16th in tackles per snap among 97 qualifying linebackers with a minimum of 200 snaps. Both have been good in coverage statistically. Walker is 25th in yards per target. Cooper is 30th in yards per target. And both are utilized as pass rushers, with Walker at a 20.6 pressure rate. That's 31st in the NFL, and he has 2.5 sacks. Cooper has a 21.6% pressure rate. That's 28th in the NFL, and he has 3.5 sacks as well. Both pressure rates are higher than Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean. Now, due to the nature of the defense, teams can manipulate their rules and attack in the middle of the field. We'll see the linebackers bite up quite a bit against play action as well, so I think that's something we could take advantage of. Edgerrin Cooper hardly played in the first game against the Eagles. Having both of these guys on the field and healthy together, because they've been injured throughout parts of this year, having both of them on the field together is going to be huge for their defense, trying to stop and slow down the explosive Saquon Barkley and also containing Jalen Hurts and the run game. But what do you think about these linebackers and really some of these other players on the back end of their defense?
I do think Walker and Cooper are kind of cut from the same cloth. You mentioned how athletic they are. And when they're in position, they're really good players. There's no doubt about it. To be honest with you, I was not the highest person in the world on Cooper coming out because I thought his open field tackling, he really struggled, and his eye discipline was terrible at times. But he had huge pluses to his game that we've seen, and I think they've done a great job of letting him do what he does best. He has a ton of range, but I will say I watched him quite closely. I still think he has some of those eye discipline issues. He's hyper aggressive, will overrun the play, take really aggressive angles. Now, 3 or 4 out of 5 times, and he makes the play, it's amazing. But that 1 out of 5, he might give up an explosive. So a little bit of a double-edged sword. For the most part, it's been to a huge positive. In fact, outside of McKinney, you could argue he's been the best player on their entire defense. I do wonder, Quay Walker returning from ankle injury, if he doesn't have quite the same mobility that he normally would. And he suffers from some of the same problems as Cooper with play recognition and over pursuit. So these are guys I think that can be exploited. You mentioned it. On play action, but also misdirection plays in general, where you start to get a lot of guys flowing one direction and the play is actually to the other side. One play that we both have talked about ad nauseum is where you get that split zone action with Goddard working across the field and then you hit him in the flat. That's something that could be pretty effective against this team. Moving in the secondary, it's been a house of cards. They're shuffling guys all around. Bullard, we saw him at safety in the first game. Now he's moving into the slot and he's struggling. He seems to play a lot better when the play is in front of him, and they've replaced him with Evan Williams, and he looks like a good rookie, to be honest with you. Keyshawn Nixon, he's now moved to the outside, and they're using him in a way that masks a lot of his weaknesses, because when he's playing up and aggressive, he's actually a pretty dynamic player. They benched Eric Stokes. He was a guy who had struggled throughout the year, highly athletic, but doesn't have the technique to back it up. Really, McKinney, he's the guy who can ruin the game for you. He had that amazing interception. People talked about how Hurts made a terrible play on that interception. If you go back and watch the All-22, I mean, McKinney completely abandoned his side of the field, came over and intercepted it. So yeah, it was an aggressive throw, but like his coverage instincts is incredible. So, I think there's areas to attack. And it's just, to me, the thing that's going to be really interesting is how much do they help the guys that are a little weaker in coverage versus try to let everyone just fill their role, play sound football without a lot of help.
Yeah, and when we talked about in the preview episode that they're running a lot of cover 2. I think part of that is to help disguise some of their deficiencies at corner. You mentioned it. Keyshawn Nixon moved from the slot as a career slot guy to outside, out wide now. He's actually faring pretty well. 6.1 yards per target allowed. That's 27th out of 126 corners with a minimum of 150 coverage snaps, according to PFF. He will get grabby on routes. He had 8 penalties, which is tied for the 17th most among corners. And like you mentioned, both of these corners will kind of bail and give up a lot of space underneath. They just don't want to get beat deep. You can hit these guys on curls, comebacks, out routes, things like that. We should talk about a little bit about Carrington Valentine. He's the guy that put Eric Stokes to the bench. Now, I do wonder if it's somewhat of a rotation. We've seen times, if you go back and look at the Lions game, there was a couple blown coverages by Valentine. And then next thing you know, Stokes is back in the game and then they're in a rotation. They rotated through much of the rest of the season, but the last game of the year against the Bears, it was Carrington Valentine out there. I think Valentine is a solid corner in many aspects, although if you look at his metrics, his yards per target at 10.0 would rank 121st out of corners. But when you turn on the film, it's not a lot of him just getting straight up beat. A lot of it is breakdowns in coverage where he either bites up too aggressively on the flat and allows a pass to go over top of his head, or if he's anticipating a quick passing concept, he comes out of his deep third and attacks an underneath route when he really shouldn't have. Now, his quarterback rating against is 79.6, which is 25th in the NFL. He has 2 interceptions and 0 touchdowns allowed. That's a big reason why. He has some ability and has made some pretty impressive plays on tape, but I think he is a guy that in zone coverage, you can kind of manipulate him a little bit. But looking at Javon Bullard, you mentioned it. I don't think he did a very good job playing as a safety, so they wanted to get him closer to the line of scrimmage. He's pretty good in his run fits and run defense and tackling, but his 8.8 yards per target would rank 107th if he was listed as a corner. He's a guy that you can attack in coverage as well. And then you mentioned Xavier McKinney is one of the best safeties in the NFL. He's second in the NFL in interceptions with 8. He has a 14th lowest missed tackle rate. He patrols the middle of the field as a post safety. He roams the intermediate as a flat or hook defender. He's really good at disguising coverage and rotating late. He's adept at reading the quarterback's eyes and their drop and adjusting his drop and taking good angles to the ball when it is in the air. He just overall has elite football IQ and understands how offenses are trying to attack the coverage. And then you mentioned it, Evan Williams. The Packers found a good young safety and rookie Evan Williams. Good instincts for the position. He will come out of the roof and attack the run aggressively, and he gives the Packers versatility to rotate either safety down so they don't have to just sit McKinney in the post the entire game. But that's what I saw from the Packers on the back end. I do think they can attack these corners with different concepts, but I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of man coverage from these corners unless you can get them into third and short situations. Outside of that, I anticipate a lot of cover 3, a lot of cover 2, a lot of quarters coverages to try and help out these corners that are in the game. But that will be it for today's episode. Make sure to stay tuned as we will be back tomorrow previewing the battle in the trenches.